In this video, we will cover the Paleolithic, Neolithic, and Bronze Ages. While we're going to cover a variety of places and phenomena, we're going to focus in on Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. So we're starting with the Paleolithic period. It means the Old Stone Age, and this is because the tools were primarily made of stone. It occurred about 2.5 million years ago and lasted until 10,000 BCE. The people during this time were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers, and art was more naturalistic. It was reflecting nature and reality. While researchers are not sure, they speculate that the art was more ritual-centric or hunting-focused. So starting 2 million years ago, they had crude stone-cutting tools, and this was found in East Central Africa. Then there was the development of imagination and invention, so they were using these tools to problem solve and to fill certain needs. Moving on to 1 million years ago, the tools become more refined. They have sharp cutting edges, and these are found in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Next, we have 250,000 years ago. The tools are becoming more symmetrical in design, and they have things like choppers and hand axes. There's a higher awareness of the relationship between form and function. Moving on to 100,000 years ago, they're starting to create beads and powders sprinkled around grave sites. This is suggesting ritual, ceremony, and tradition, even though the exact meaning is still unknown. Next, 77,000 years ago, there was a piece of ochre engraved with symbols, creating a pattern. This could have been practical, but it seems to be symbolic or decorative, and it was found in 2002 in South Africa. So up top here, we have two views of the Holofels figure. She stands at only 2 inches high, and there's a ring on the top, as if to be strung on a necklace. She was found near a 3-holed flute that was carved out of bone, suggesting the existence of music during this time as well. On the bottom, we have the woman of Willendorf. She stands about 4.5 inches tall. Both figures suggest the veneration of a certain body, whether honoring a mother goddess or functioning as a fertility icon. Looking at paintings, there's mostly animal subjects. They're more simplified, and they're thought to be spiritual or hunting related. So this top image is about 39,900 years old. It was found in a cave in Indonesia. So the technique used here is the humans would put their hand on the wall and then blow red powder around it. So they would leave a negative image of their hand and a positive image of the powder. Then the hand is in the top right corner. Below the hand, we see what is now an extinct animal called the pig deer, which was added to the cave at least 35,400 years ago. Moving on to only 30,000 years ago, we have the bottom image, found in the Chauvet Cave in South Central France, and it's depicting animals like horses, rhinos, and tigers. This is a larger image of the cave paintings in Indonesia, and for reference, I've roughly outlined the pig deer in the hand. And here it is without any lines. Next, we're going to look at petroglyphs. These are formed by scratching away at exposed stone to create a rock carving. Because these are found above ground, they're much harder to date. Usually works can be dated by the ground and the soil and the rock around them. Another concern with them being above ground is their erosion from elements like acid rain or industrial developing. Now we're on to the Neolithic period, which is the New Stone Age. It first emerged in present-day northwestern Iraq around 9,000 to 6,000 BCE. Now people were more village farmers and herders. There was an agricultural revolution, and as people became more in tune with the seasons, they created new techniques that worked with these rhythms. The artwork has also become more geometric embellishments on functional objects, like clay pots that store food and seeds, which we can see in the example here. This is a reflection of people being more settled. They're in villages, so their focus is going to be more about growing and maintaining food rather than hunting for it. As we just established, there's a lot of pottery, especially found in China, and the styles are more geometric and abstracted, although historians believe that these are probably drawn from natural shapes like shells. This is where we also see large stone arrangements like Stonehenge, where we're seeing 25 tons of large stone. Stonehenge was found in South Central England and believed to be important for rituals as well as a possible means of tracking time. Others see the surrounding burial sites as an indication of a funerary function, although it probably served different functions in different time periods. Next, we move into the Bronze Age, which is where we see official civilizations, which is defined as cultures or composites of cultures that have fairly complex social orders and relatively higher degrees of technological development. For instance, food production from agriculture and animal husbandry, occupational specialization, Writing, production of bronze by smelting lead and tin, which also leads to better weapons and larger empires. Also pictured here, we have a bronze sculpture made through the lost wax process. Next, we're going to focus in on Mesopotamia, which is the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, as named by the Greeks, the land between the rivers, or present-day central and northern Iraq. Because of its geography, it was very vulnerable to invasion, and as a result was ruled by different people over time. It arose parallel to Egypt in the 4th millennium BCE, lasting 3,000 years. The first civilization of which was Sumer, in the southernmost part, and the Sumerians invented the world's first writing, wheel, and plow. Ziggurats were architectural developments that were integral to the Sumerians' culture and religion. These buildings were temples set on huge platforms and topped with shrines. In these shrines, the ruling priests and priestesses could be closer to God. It was considered a sacred mountain linking heaven and earth. This is where the Sumerians worshipped a hierarchy of gods, and it was always located in the center of each city-state. It was filled with sun-baked bricks and faced with glazed and kiln-fired bricks. The building was primarily made with these bricks and with some wood because there was a lack of stone, thus few of them still stand today. Now, the art of Mesopotamia was based around ritual and spirituality. This example here is one of the oldest surviving narrative relief sculptures. A relief sculpture is raised, although it's primarily on a flat surface. So you can see where it's been carved into, but it's not a totally carved out sculpture. It's still on a flat surface. And this example is focused on fertility, depicting Inanna, the goddess of fertility, who is very important to the Sumerians and often represented in their art and literature. Throughout the Bronze Age, there's a long tradition of lost wax casting to create elaborate representational artworks in bronze, which we saw in the sculptural example a few slides ago. Next, we're going to move on to ancient Egypt and their architecture. And because of their location surrounded by desert, they developed without much outside influence, and as a result created a distinct Bronze Age style. One great example of which is the Great Pyramids. These were gigantic mountain-like burial structures that were made for pharaohs, who were the god-king rulers. They were created using huge stone blocks that were stacked without mortar, and they were composed of solid interiors with narrow passageways that led to the burial chambers. Their religious beliefs were deeply rooted in the afterlife, so bodily preservation and care for the dead was crucial. As a result, pharaohs were embalmed and buried with gifts and belongings. The architectural example here shows the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. There were wall paintings and reliefs that told the story of the queen's life, including her birth from the sun god Amen. It was an elegant site for rituals with architecture that complemented the landscape. And because of this elaborate temple, she was one of the first famous women in art history. Among the gifts buried with the dead were statues, and they served as receptacles for the spirit in the afterlife. Technically speaking, artists sketched into the stone and then carved inward from that sketch. So Tutankhamun, or King Tut, is one of the best known pharaohs because many of his hundreds of artifacts were found intact, one of which we see here, and it's a good example of how Egyptian sculpture blended portraiture and idealism. So looking left to right in this example, we start by seeing the goddess Hathor. She's crowned with the sun between bull horns and represents fertility, natural cycles, and the welcoming of the afterlife. Next we see Pharaoh Menkaure, wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, followed by a goddess that was local to the central Nile region. We can see in this example that it's made to be clear, it's portraiture, it's symbolic, and it's idealizing. Usually in royal portraiture, there's a frontal pose with the left foot forward, there's a false ceremonial beard, and it's still attached to the stone that it's carved from, as opposed to a sculpture that's carved on all sides, which is called a sculpture in the round. Moving on to the painting of ancient Egypt, again we're trying to avoid ambiguity and be really clear. We see this in the pictorial perspectives and angles as well as in the human body. There's great attention to detail down to the animal species, and it also utilizes hierarchy of scale, which prioritizes the most important person as the largest figure. Their picture-based writing system, or hieroglyphs, were also often integrated into these compositions. Why does this matter? So what? So we were looking at objects from the past, but they directly reflect the culture that created them and teach us so much about what life was like back then. It gives us keys to understanding what a society was like before us. We can trace back origins or traditions, and we can see how things changed or how ideas were exchanged. Another thing to consider is nailing down this definition of art. Which seems easy, but when you bring up artifact versus art, I feel like there's a bigger discussion there. What are the distinctions between those two words? Because one feels more scientific and one feels way more expressive. Do both apply? Where do we draw the line between artifact and art? For instance, looking at these various depictions of Venus throughout history, I think we would all agree that they're, quote, art. Looking back at the Neolithic earthenware, there's a geometric goat which is clearly artistic expression. Yet I think most of us would consider that an artifact. That would just be our knee-jerk reaction. But I will reiterate again that most of art history, most of the art canon, is all controlled by the West, which makes these easily identifiable as artwork. Yet, as I said before, I think there's a bigger discussion for us to have here. Another point of interest, having looked at those depictions of Venus, is the fact that the woman of Willendorf used to be called the Venus of Willendorf. So, having impressed these Greco-Roman ideals and motives onto this ancient artifact, we know that Venus represents sex, love, and fertility. So why did historians change the way they titled this piece? Another comparison point is their positions. The marble Venus on the right is executing the Venus pudica, which is a common pose for historical female nudes in which the figure is trying to be modest and cover themselves, while actually drawing attention to these exact areas. And again, we're seeing the term Venus being used, which just rhetorically projects even more ideals onto this ancient figurine on the left. So how is nudity being handled differently in these two pieces? How do the anatomical proportions and positions, particularly in regards to representing women, stress different cultural concerns in these two sculptures? So I would ask, does the language here matter? But the answer is always yes. The language always matters. Language is the way that we see the entire world. So the terms we use, the contextual references that we make, even if it's subconscious, like in this one. So I'm not going to ask you if the language matters, but I guess I'm going to say, do you agree or disagree with the name change? Either way, express how and why the language here is working. And you could even loop it back into our conversation earlier about art versus artifact. And this is where I leave you. So stay safe, get some sleep, and I will see you all in class.